Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Francis Ford Coppola, and Charlie Chaplin. These 6 persons have all made a giant impact on not only the world of filmmaking, but the world altogether. They redefined art together and made some of the most beautiful pieces of media you will ever see today. They are giant figures in the world of inspiration, and with good reason too. They've built worlds, constructed characters, and put the audience in the character's shoes, making an unforgettable experience, and one that feels truly real. They showed people the true art of filmmaking, and it's no wonder why they're still being praised today for changing the medium altogether. These people was or were proud filmmakers who deserves to be in the history books. But I would like to add one more person to that list. Daniel Espinosa. Though his name may not sound like much, and yes, he did less than noticeable films like Ubin for Kilit Eden, Schnabakash, Child 44, and Life. What he's obviously best known for in any ways possible. A film that, without a doubt in my mind, will be an inspiration for anything you ever see. Every book you read, every movie or TV show you watch, even the very sidewalk you walk on will be inspiration from David Espinosa's work. And this film in question was the one and only Morbius. The character of Morbius was created by Marvel editor Roy Thomas, and Morbius was designed by Marvel artist Gil Kane, who also, believe it or not, co-created Adam Warlock. Morbius debuted in February of 1971 in the popular comic series The Amazing Spider-Man, where he was depicted as an antagonist against Spider-Man. It is where his original trademark was Morbius the Living Vampire. Morbius was created following the Comics Code Authority updating its censorship board that lifted the ban of supernatural entities and characters in comic books at the time. It was the first flagship Spider-Man comic that wasn't written by Stan Lee at the time because he was writing a script for an unproduced, unknown sci-fi film. In an interview with Roy Thomas in 2009, he said, "We were talking about doing Dracula, but Stan wanted a costumed villain. Other than that, he didn't specify what we should do." Because of this, Roy looked to his childhood and got inspired by an unspecified sci-fi film for when he watched as a kid, which depicted a man turning into a vampire via radiation, then magic. Due to popular belief, Roy Thomas said that Dr. Michael Morbius' name was not inspired by Dr. Morbius in Forbidden Planet. Gil Kane said that the look of Morbius came from actor Jack Palance. Morbius' debut was rather short-lived, as he went through a 2-issue story arc, both of them residing in the Amazing Spider-Man comic book series. Then, in September of 1972, Morbius was in a vintage horror comics magazine, Vampire Tales, where he received an origin story for the Amazing Spider-Man. 2 years later, Morbius became the star of the horror comic series Adventure into Fear. He was the third star in the series, the other two being Man-Thing and Howard the Duck. Why would Howard the Duck be in a horror comic? After a 16-year hiatus of mostly going through slight appearances, bridging between main villain or cameo, in 1992, Morbius got his very own standalone comic book series, Morbius the Living Vampire, which was intended to be part of the Rise of the Midnight Suns crossover story arc. The Midnight Suns would be a team of superheroes that focused around the horror or supernatural elements of Marvel, with the leader of the team being Ghost Rider. This time, Morbius' status would be of a hero, as he would now have new powers such as hypnosis and telepathy. He stayed with the Midnight Suns until 1993, where he went back to his Spider-Man roots, and then he got back to his villain phase, and partook in most of Spider-Man's adventures from the 90s to the 2000s. He then became enemies with most of the members of the Midnight Suns, like Doctor Strange and Blade. Because why the hell won't they? They're a match made in heaven. Morbius is considered in the comic book world to be one of the greatest Spider-Man villains ever. Even IGN ranked him as the 9th greatest Spider-Man villain of all time. And with all this fame, it's pretty impossible to not picture him on the big screen. Fans have wondered what Morbius would be like in a Spider-Man film. Maybe fighting Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or maybe Tom Holland. But when the time was right and the night was high, on April 2018, Sony would announce that they would do something with the living vampire.
Three, two, one, drop! Go.
There have been several attempts to bring Morbius to the big screen. One of these attempts being 1998's Blade. Now, you have to understand, Blade was and still is a pretty big deal. In a time where comic book movies suffered the same fate as video game movies and were nowhere near the powerhouse of money you see today, Blade was one of the first ever comic book movies to break the cycle. While it wasn't the biggest movie of 1998, it was a ginormously critical success, and showed critics and audiences that there's light at the end of the tunnel for these comic book movies. So you can imagine that providing the creative decisions to the movie was no easy feat, even with Marvel being so restricted with their movies at the time. Oh my god, Gwen Stacy. It was director Stephen Nortington's idea to sneak Morbius into the film. So he did, the little genius. In the alternate ending to Blade, Blade fights what looks like to be a giant Kool-Aid stained Hydro Man who claims he's Morbius.
Are we having fun yet, Blade? I sure hope so. Because after I'm done with you, I'm gonna fuck the whole human race.
Oh my god, he sounds like that one guy from college that tries to make himself look cool in front of anything that even remotely looks like a human being. Yeah, unsurprisingly, Stephen Nortington and the rest of the crew hated it. But hey, that didn't stop Artisan Entertainment from at least trying to make a Morbius movie. In 2000, Marvel made an agreement with movie studio Artisan Entertainment to turn at least 15 Marvel properties into whatever they want. Movies, TV shows, internet projects, direct-to-video releases, anything was on the table. Artisan had a lot more creative freedom than you think, despite none of these projects ever seeing the light of day. After the success of Blade, Artisan wanted to capitalize on this R-rated superhero idea, so most of the projects they were doing were more adult-oriented than kid-oriented. Some of the properties that they had at the time were Captain America, Longshot, Black Panther, Power Pack, Mort the Dead Teenager, Deadpool, Ant-Man, Iron Fist, and yes, Morbius. These ideas never came to be because Lionsgate was looking to buy Artisan, and Artisan practically jumped at the idea. Then finally, on December 15th, 2003, Lionsgate bought Artisan for $220 million, leaving all of their Marvel projects behind. And meanwhile, Marvel said, okay. Because, well, these movies were being released at the time. Sadly, though, as comic book movies gotten better and better and broke all kinds of box office records, the trail for Morbius has gotten cold. Fans of Morbius would wonder what he would look like in any of the Spider-Man movies. But until then, the chances of that were pretty unlikely. Morbius would sit on a shelf, collecting dust for a while, waiting for his film debut. That was until, in November of 2017, Sony would announce that they would bring Morbius to the big screen in his own feature film. In October of 2018, Sony Pictures released a movie called Venom. It was a standalone feature based on the famous Spider-Man villain from the comics. Since Sony had the right to Spider-Man and all the villains attached to him, it was always on Sony's mind to build a whole cinematic universe out of Spider-Man and his characters. They tried to do it with the Amazing Spider-Man series that Andrew Garfield was a part of, but The Amazing Spider-Man 2 was released and got terrible reviews from both critics and audiences, and got a reputation as being the Batman and Robin of the franchise. And so because of this, Sony had to share the rights with Disney in order to get Spider-Man in the MCU. In a desperate state of matter, Sony looked to other characters connected with Spider-Man that showed some popularity, and one of the characters that they found was Venom. They took him, gave it its own movie, made almost $1 billion. Thanks, China. While it did see poor reviews by critics and audiences, it did do well in the children's YouTube genre.
Huh? What is that? Huh? Venom? Ah! Ah! I'm out of here.
See that? Good marketing. So, despite the poor reviews, it did found gold at the end of the rainbow, and so in Sony's mind, this was enough to start their own cinematic universe of Spider-Man characters. At first, it was called the Sony Pictures Universe of Marvel characters, but then later down the line, it was called Sony's Spider-Man Universe. 3 years later, and Sony released a sequel for Venom, Venom Let There Be Carnage. It did get poor reviews and even less money, but it did paint a slightly larger picture for Sony's Spider-Man Universe. But if we were to travel back in time, let's say 2 years earlier, we would have seen Sony Pictures announce a movie that will be the greatest piece of art in our history. We would have witnessed the very announcement that our Lord and Savior would be coming. In November of 2019, Sony Pictures announced that they would add another addition to their cinematic universe where they are introduce another hero to the big screen. That hero in question? It's Morbin time. In November of 2017, writers Matt Shazama and Buck Sharpless both submitted a script to Sony after a secret development process at the studio for a Morbius film. Sony came into contact with Hollywood actor Jared Leto to become the star of the film, but he said he wouldn't commit if he was happy with the direction the film would take. Sony agreed to this, so they began setting out looking for filmmakers, and so would Jared Leto. Sony approached Atonin Fakwa to direct the feature, director of all of these movies. He expressed interest in doing the film and said he wanted to do a superhero movie that's something that's closer to what I get excited about, but he ultimately decided to back out of the project, choosing instead to do Infinite. So Sony approached F. Gary to do the film, director of Friday, Straight Outta Compton, The Negotiator, and The Fate of the Furious. He expressed interest in doing it, but ultimately turned it down. Then, in the above heaven, they found him, sweet, glorious him, David Espinosa, the king of all directors, the god of all film, the master of all art, the emperor himself. Ugh. Jared Leto found him on tour for his band 30 Seconds to Mars in Germany. Jared Leto and David Espinosa had a conversation about the film, and just like that, both were confirmed to partake in the film. As pre-production rolled around in September of 2018, producer Mac Tomac said the project was very far along at that stage and they plan to start filming in early 2019. With the intention that Morbius will be the second film to Sony's Spider-Man universe after Venom. He also added that Jared Leto would add the same intensity into the film that he brought into his role as the Joker in 2016's Suicide Squad. After Venom's success proved to be enough for them to keep making movies, they kept going on with the production of Morbius as well as Venom 2. Andrea Ajorna and Matt Smith was soon added to the cast. In September of 2019, Sony announced a new agreement with Disney that extended the previous deal with Marvel. The deal was that Marvel would keep Spider-Man in the MCU, but Spider-Man would be able to cross universes with Sony, as well as other characters connected to Spider-Man. In Morbius' first trailer, there was a brief cameo of Michael Keaton reprising his role as Adrian Toomes, aka the Vulture. hinting that the MCU and Sony's Spider-Man universe share the same. But due to the event of Spider-Man No Way Home, they had to reshoot all the scenes with Michael Keaton in order to fit the timeline better. As post-production rolled around the corner, the entire world was hit with a worldwide pandemic called COVID-19. The disease in question was called coronavirus, and it was a super spreader. Practically everyone had it. As expected, going into large groups of people weren't safe anymore. Everybody had to stay inside for over 2 years in a lockdown. So, as you can expect, movie theaters weren't having the best time right now. Some of the biggest movies at the time weren't even close to being saved from being backhanded by this pandemic. Almost all of them were indeed bombs. So because of this, Morbius had to be delayed from July 10th, 2020 to March 19th, 2021. This would be the first in 5 delays for Morbius. The second delay would move to October 8th, 2021. Then it had to be delayed again to somewhere in February because No Time to Die was moved to an October date. Then it was delayed again to January because of reshoots. Then, for whatever reason, it was delayed to April 1st, 2022 as its final resting place. After 2 years of waiting, fans were finally getting Morbius. It was now time for the Marvel legend himself to finally be on the big screen, and will hereby be known as the greatest cinematic achievement in the history of film. A film so good that Martin Scorsese himself would change his mind about superhero movies forever and on. This would be the time the world got a taste of morbing. But before I tell you about that, this video was sponsored by the Morbin Burger. Inspired by the $352 trillion movie Morbius, comes the Morbin Burger. Morbius. With the Morbin Burger, you can guarantee the health. With 1 million calories in every bite, you can safely say that this is one of the burgers you've ever tried. Hello, I am a doctor, and this is indeed one of the burgers I ever tried and is guaranteed health. Hashtag Morbius Sweet. Go to www.morbinburger.com, and every Morbin Burger you buy will throw in a free Carnage Burger for free. It's free. Wow, that's a beautiful deal. That is just a beautiful deal. Free Carnage Burger, Jesus. Oh God, hail Satan. And if you're still not convinced, here's this totally real customer's totally real opinion on the Morbin Burger. Yee.
Oh, the Morbius burger is great.
Buy it! Morbius was met with an overwhelmingly positive response, topping over the highest grossing films at the time like Avengers Endgame and Titanic. On record, it sold over 10 more billion tickets in less than 24 hours. It also became the highest rated film of all time, passing Paddington 2. And everyone seemed to agree that Morbius is one of the movies of all time. And it appears that everyone seems to agree because everybody is still celebrating what an absolute movie it was. The actors acted, the director directed, the script was written, the visual effects were animated, and everyone did their little part to make this movie a movie. And above all, the least we can do is say thank you. Thank you, Jared Leto, thank you, Daniel Espinosa, and thank you, Sony, for making a one-of-a-kind cinematic experience that cannot be topped, ever. Even if you do make a sequel, it will not top the amount of pure perfection this was. Thank you, Sony. You have the whole world's blessings.